Okay, so in this practice example, we're going to be looking at pound Aussie on the 4-hour chart here. All right, now let's take a look here. Now, the market is coming down from a downtrend, right? It's coming down, lower lows, lower highs, breach again, comes lower, and in this whole big boy phase, if we understand it, it's like, okay, anything below that is still seller's territory, right? You all get that so far. Now, the whole thing going further is now if I go like this, okay, it's starting to pull back. We're watching the pullback phase. Now, notice a time lapse between this pullback phase. It's from the 11th until the end of July, basically, right? So this is July 11th until the end of July. That's a long period of halt, right? So we're gonna stalk this on its way up because there's this miniature upward movement, right? So it's this downside slows down, the rubber band man slows down, comes down, slows down, and then he takes complete rests and begins the buyer rubber band man, right? So he starts going north. Now in this north, he goes up, halts, breaches, goes higher. We're going to put a line right there. That's the breach as he goes higher. Then he pulls back, holds, goes higher, doesn't make a higher high, but comes right back down, holds, goes higher, doesn't make a higher high, comes down, and then he finally makes a higher high, and then where he holds. So the breach of this whole scenario happens from above here. Okay? Again, he goes up, halts, goes higher high, and then he starts holding in this area. After that, the next hold is up here because he makes no higher high until he finally gets up to here. Okay? So we got the guy who's responsible initiates down here, and the guy where the breach happens is on this line, right? Because he breaches above that spot right there. Okay? Once that breach happens and the market starts to go long and long and long, and each phase, if you actually look at it, if I draw like a dotted line here and say that, okay, since this price never actually went higher, look at that. He just never goes higher. This is why it's important to map out your areas as early as possible rather than later and saying, well, I think my line's up here, because that can be incorrect. Okay? Because there was no higher high at any stage. It just keeps collapsing down. So if you look at that buyer, the buyer is pretty much done, right? The rubber band man buyer, he goes up, 100% retracement. Goes up, breaks his new high, but then 80% retracement. Goes up, no higher high, 50% retracement. Goes up, higher high, comes down 50%, but no higher high, because he comes right back. Then he goes up, no higher high again, but he comes collapsing down to 150% retracement. Okay? So the buyer is dead at this stage. Now, in this whole sequence of things, the reason why I want you guys to focus on ranges that are big enough like this is because you can see the momentum of that rubber band man. If you simply just say, well, that's my range here, now can you tell me the momentum of that? No, it's difficult to see the momentum of that, right? It's like, well, for me to see the momentum of that, I'm going to have to go down to the 1 hour or the 15 minutes. But if I start doing that, then what am I trading? I have no idea because I'm just hopping around like a Bugs Bunny, you know, like I'm just going from this time frame to that time frame to that time frame because I'm looking for something to do. Don't do that. Don't look for stuff to do. Okay? Be patient because patience pays off a lot more. Okay, so when you're looking at this whole sequence, you have your bottom line here starts to develop. You have your upper line starts to develop like, no higher high. So it must be the seller's turn. Now we don't know it's a range yet. Okay, all we know is we have reference points. We have point number 1. Okay, point number 2 comes with a incident, and then point number 3 yet once again holds in this area. So it's like, okay, if he's not going higher and he's not going lower, we have now developed a range. But notice, we've developed a range ahead of time into the 3-point stage rather than a 4-point stage. Okay? And one of the piece that we like to see is incidents. We got an incident involved in there as well, where it's like, faker. Okay. So as we see this faker, we can see this faker come down as the seller. Like seller, pullback, seller, and then a complete turnaround. It's like as if this low for this seller never happened. So it's like, okay, well then what is that? The buyer? If that's the buyer, well, then let's see, before the buy can begin, the sell is doing one last attempt. So again, let's start from here. Let me clean up all this. Let me put the line back here, and let's begin with the seller who begins from over here, right? Because this is the buyers up until the stage. Then the seller starts coming in. He breaks below this line. I'm gonna put the line right there. He breaks below that line. Okay, breaks below that line, drops further, but jumps right back up. But if he breaches that, who are we challenging? This is the guy who started it all, and this is the breach. So he can go above the breach, still doesn't mean it's out of seller's area. It's still in seller's area. What's the main function of our trade? Even though we know we're in a range, we also know we want to be on a downside as much as possible. Now, knowing this information very carefully, we're seeing sellers they became strong, but the strength was not real. They came right back up, very, very strong. It's like, my rubber band man is extremely weak. Then he tries again and tries again. Again, weakness. And then he gets snapped back. Now this snapback shows you strength of the buyers coming in now. Well, if that's the buyer, immediately his retracement is 90%. He tries again, 100%, no luck. And then he rolls over. He rolls over right there, and he turns around. Now, if I extend this out, okay, you have to understand one thing now. Because we're thinking range mentality, we're also trying to understand when is the right moment as close to the range as possible. Okay, we don't want to be hitting ourselves over here. That's participating. We want to anticipate when the movement can happen. Okay, so when you see stuff like this where it's like, okay, well, give me the buyers. Here comes the buyer, and buyer's extremely weak. Buyer tries again, doesn't get anywhere. Tries again, complete turnaround. Lowers. Okay, game on. Game on. Anywhere in this zone, if you execute, and your stop's above where the buyers called it quits. Anywhere in this zone gives your stop loss a safe area. It's not just putting it at the recent high, as we discussed in some of our recent videos, right? It has to be with that logic of why there? Why not here? Why not there? Why not anywhere else? Why there? Why is this one important? Is this because it's the recent high? No, we're not doing that recent high, recent low like nonsense that the industry does. We're not going to do that. Okay, so once that happens and the market starts collapsing, your sell trade activates. Now, in the sell trade that activates, we're watching this area like a hawk because we're unaware it's going to breach below. Okay, but our signs of the breach below happening is high, but we still don't know. It can still bounce back like it did every other time. Imagine if you hit the sell from here last time. That will work, but it's going to work all the way down to down here, right? So you got to trade there, and then you got more trades later on. The second one is over here. This is not a trade here. That's not a sell. Okay, so you gotta watch these areas for. I'm sorry, that is also a sell here, because this line maintains. So let's clean that up and then show you the 3 sells that were in this range. Okay, so market goes up, pulls back, goes higher, pulls back, maintains grounds, goes higher, barely makes a higher high, faker, comes right back down, goes high, comes down, goes high, breaches. Okay, now with this breaching happening, this whole concept of the breach happening only happens above this zone. Okay, because all of this is part of this guy trying to move. It is only this guy trying to move. No higher high, no higher high, no higher high, no higher high. And this no higher high concept can be extended across, and we're like, that's my range. Okay, so first sell as soon as the buyer collapses, right there. Okay, exits in this zone. Then the sellers come, the buyers come back up, or the sellers almost call it quits. They're coming up 100%, but remember, they're in that mini seller's territory still. And they slam right back down 100% with the inability to go back up, which means he's not willing to rest anymore. Next trade, so that's 2. There's 1, here's 2, and then you have your third one in there. There's your 3. There's your 3. And with those 3, your third one actually picks up some steam and momentum because of the big movement. But up until then, you got trade after trade after trade. Buying, not logical. Not logical. I personally wouldn't recommend it. Okay? Alright, so on to the next example.